We left off. Let's start again. Mem Daled Amud Aleph on the very bottom. We just started this. Just to review a little bit. According to the Chachamim, who we rule like the Chachamim, a Nara, if she's married, but she's only an Arusa, she's not a Nesua, if the husband chooses to divorce his wife, who's an Arusa, so either the father could accept the get, or the Nara. Either one could accept the get, she's considered divorced. And we rule this way. So we had to discuss, what about regarding kiddushin? Right? So we rule like Rabbi Yochanan, that although she's qualified to receive the get, she's not qualified to receive kiddushin. Only the father could receive kiddushin on our behalf, or if the father is agreeable that his daughter should be the one to receive kiddushin, then of course she could receive the kiddushin. But the daughter, independent of the father to receive kiddushin, she cannot marry herself off. Okay? And that's the way we rule. No, that was discussed, all that. Now we have a new question. So the Nara is qualified to receive the get. The question is, could she appoint a shliach as a woman who's fully mature, and the husband wants to divorce her? She could appoint an agent, a shliach, on her behalf to be the equivalent of herself. So here she's qualified to receive the get. Can she appoint a shliach to be the equivalent of herself? You say, shliach whatever you're able to, whatever area you're able to be effective, you could appoint a shliach to be the equivalent of yourself. That's going to be the Gemara's question. Can't she appoint a shliach to receive the get from the hand of her husband or not? So what's the question? Is she the equivalent of the father? And as the father could appoint a shliach, she can appoint a shliach? Or kichotza v'yadamyo? She's the equivalent only of the domain of the father. The reason why the Chacham are of the opinion that when the husband gives the get to the Naro, she's divorced, it's not because she is the equivalent of him, but rather because she's his domain. Since she's still in his domain until she becomes 12 and a half, until she's what we call the Bogeres, fully mature, therefore she's the equivalent of his domain. And then the Gemara explains both sides of the question. Kiara via damyo. Is she the equivalent of the father, via mashri shaliach? Just as the father can create or appoint a shaliach, an agent, afinami mashri shaliach. So she can also appoint the agent. O dilma kechotzer kechatzaro via damya. She's the equivalent of the courtyard, the domain of the father, and therefore admache gitul yodo lo megarsho. So until the get actually comes into her hand, she's not divorced. But she's not in a position to delegate it to create a shliach. That's the two sides of the question. No, she's a Nara. No. No, can't make a shliach. No, can't make a shliach anywhere. Cannot be a shliach. No, a kod could be a domain. I mean, so clearly, when she's a katana, she receives the get. There's no question. She's the equivalent of the domain. Right? Now we're talking about when she is an adult, but she's not fully out of the domain of the father. Is she the equivalent of the father, so there she can? Or no, she's only the domain of the father, regarding in this particular area. Someone asks, the Rava. This is the question Rava posed to Rav Nachman. So Mar asks, is there even a basis for this question? Rava, kosav get v'nosan biyad avdo yoshein. The husband writes a get, and she has a slave, an Eved Kanani, so it's equivalent to her chattel. And the slave is sleeping. So the slave is what? Her domain, correct? And the husband puts the get in the hand of the slave that's sleeping. Umishar moso. And she's standing by, watching the get, while it's in the hand of the sleeping slave. Harez a get, is a valid get. Nior, what about if the slave is awake? It's in his hand, she's standing, identical situation. She's standing next to her slave. Instead of husband giving the get to her, the husband puts the get into the hand of the slave, which is her chattel. Yeah? But he's awake. He's awake. Ain't no get. The slave is awake. She's awake, standing next to her slave. If he's sleeping, and she's standing there while he puts the get in the slave's hand, she's divorced. But if the slave is awake and she's standing there and she sees everything identically the same, she's not divorced. Amai, why? Amai ain't no get. Why is it not a get? Why is the basis, if the get is valid or not, why is it determined whether he's awake or sleeping, the slave? A chotzer, a courtyard, has to be a protected domain. It has to be protected as a result of the one who's the master of the domain. So since over here the slave has a mind of his own, so although she's watching it, but since he himself, it's in his hand, so he's so-called in control, because when he's awake, so therefore it's not considered being protected due to her, but rather due to him. We'll see in a moment. So therefore the chotzer, it has to be put in her chotzer. So even though in the physical domain it's hers, because the slave is her chattel, but since the slave is awake and he has a mind of his own, why is it being protected? It's being protected because of the slave's awareness that it's on his body. So take a look at Rashi. Why do you need chotz mishdameres? Why does it have to be protected based on the mindset of the awareness of the person, and it's not enough the other person stand next to it? So he says, Rashi says something interesting. Near ain't no get. It's the third narrow line in Rashi. If he's awake, it's not a get. Because who's considered overseeing and watching the get? And it's not comparable to what an absolute domain is. The Ki Savo. I mean, that the Torah tells us, it says, V'nosam biyodo. So seemingly, the Torah is saying it has to be put in her hand. So based on another word, the Gemara says, we trample the Torah says not only hand, even her courtyard, her domain. So to what degree does the domain have to be, the chotzer, the Torah says the chotzer that's qualified, the equivalent of her hand, what profile does it have to have? It has to be a chotzer. What is it? The average, when we speak about the generic courtyard domain, why is it a protected domain? It's due to something that the owner had done. What is that? Shegidra Soviv, the owner has a fenced, creates the enclosure, or has the enclosure made, and who has access to open and close it, to enter the domain and to exit the domain, to seal the domain and to open it. That's the owner. So therefore, the control has to be the control of the owner. That's the chotzer. So since over here, if the slave is awake, and it's his mindset, he is a partner to protecting the get, therefore that's a diminishment in what the profile of the chotzer is. Therefore it's not it's not a sufficient domain to be considered that it was put in her domain to be divorced.
But then I have this idea of forward, like if the slave goes and picks up $20, we say that automatically goes to the master, right? Why don't we have that differentiation? We say the slave has a mind of its own. It's just an Indian in courtyard which relates back to Yado. Is that what the more is saying?
There it's different. It's different. Because there, the woman is the only one who's qualified to do to receive the get. It says Yodo Chatzeiro. So the chotz has to be similar to Hayad. If you put it on her hand, the only one who has relevance to that situation is herself, no one else. Correct? The courtyard has to be the equivalent of that. For acquisition, the slave is her chattel. So the mindset of the slave is not in contradiction to what's necessary to acquire. For a get, it has to be her. So the domain has to be similar to herself. Okay? That's the reason for a get. It's a problem for acquisition. It's not. No, that's why it's proving that it's not. She should be similar to. But you see something interesting here. Well, according to the Chacham, we say that not only is the father qualified to receive the get, even she is. So originally we had the question. I mean, you see clearly from the Gemara how the Gemara understands it. It's not that the daughter is independent of the father. She is something. She is the equivalent of the father. She's definitely not independent. She's definitely not independent of the father. It's not. What does Rabbi Yehuda argue with the Chacham? He says you can't have two hands regarding the get. You have one person, not two people. So it seems to be two hands means you can't have another party. She's not another party. She is the father. She is the father. If she's the father, so why can't you have two people receiving? It's not called two people. It's one person who has an extra hand. So when Rabbi Yehuda says "Ein shnei yodayim regarding get, he doesn't mean say two people who are independent of one another. Doesn't mean that. Shnei yodayim means you cannot have the equivalent of two hands where the other location is the equivalent of the first location. But who is the so-called the master of the marriage? It's the father. And therefore, she cannot act independent of him as what? As a courtyard. And therefore it's in contradiction to what the father is. It's like the slave. So if she's awake and you put the get in her hand, it should not be. Because who's considered the proprietor of the marriage? The father. So if that's the case, it's a problem. Because Torah says you have to give the get to the person who owns the marriage. So since she's in his domain, until either full maturity or until she's fully married, therefore, any other mindset other than the father's, it becomes a problem. No, this is in regard to get. No, you have one or two things. Either chotzer or she's the equivalent of what? She's the extension of the father, we're talking about two people, not a domain. She is the equivalent of the father. She's not the domain of she's not the father's domain. Although she's in the domain, she's not the domain. That's when she's an adult. No. Here we're saying the nari is the chotzer. The nari is the chotzer. Not you putting it in nari's chotzer. Putting it in the hand of the nari is the equivalent of putting it into the father's chotzer. But the Gemara says that's a problem. Because you see the slave, who's the equivalent of the master's domain, but if the slave is awake, she's not divorced. Forget about Rabbi Yehuda right now. A slave, definitely. A slave is that's your chattel. Sleeping slave, it's your chattel. Awake slave would be a problem. Right? But here we're going according to the Chachamim. So you see clearly over here that the daughter herself is not the proprietor of the marriage. Even though she's the object of the marriage, she's not the proprietor. Because otherwise it's irrelevant. So what is her mindset? She is the proprietor of the marriage. Let's see. So the Gemara says, therefore, it has to be restated, the question. The Gemara says, she's the equivalent of the hand of the father. So now we have a question. If she's the equivalent of the putting it in the father's hand, but factually she's not the father, so is she invested with the ability to create a shliach as the father can, or maybe not? So Rav Nachman says to Rav, no. She's an extension of the father, but not to the equivalent to appoint a shliach. She's the hand of the father. She is the hand. Because she's not. I'll give you an example. We say shliach shlom kamoso. An agent is the equivalent of the one who appoints the agent. Right? Let's say a person says, you're the agent to receive the get, but you're not empowered to appoint another agent to be the equivalent of yourself. But if you're me, why not? Because I have control. Because you go back to the source of the control. The source of the control is the one who appointed the first agent. Correct? It's the same thing. The Torah says you're the equivalent of a hand. It's like a hand which has no, the operating mechanism is the father. The person is the father. I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't want to confuse you. There's a famous machlokas between the Rambam and the Torah. The halacha is that if a person becomes incompetent, he cannot give a get. The husband becomes incompetent. We'll call it a shota. Becomes unstable. He's not qualified to give a get. What happens if a person appoints a shliach to give a get? So when he appointed the agent, he was fully competent. Subsequently, he becomes incompetent, but the get hadn't yet been delivered to the wife. We're talking about on a Torah level, not talking on a rabbinic level. On a Torah level, is the agent still considered functional regarding to give the get or not? Because he was appointed to be the agent before. Wait, so okay, you would think so. That's why you don't fly F-21s. You understand? Even though you think you may know how to fly it, but you don't. Okay, you would think so. Okay, you're below the knee, right? Knee down to the floor. Okay. So it's a machlokes the Rambam and the Rambam in the Torah. The question is, when a person appoints an agent, is the agent the equivalent of the one who appoints him? Literally the equivalent. So therefore, even though the appointer becomes non-functional because he's a shota, he's unstable, but once he's established the agent, the equivalent of him, now you have a functional agent. Because he's independent of what? Of the person now. But everybody agrees. If the one who appoints him dies, even if he appoints a shliach, even Rambam agrees. The Gemara says, "En get lachamisa," right? Let's say the get hadn't been delivered, and the husband dies, right? You're not going to say, "Well, she's not a widow. She is a widow," right? If there's a surviving brother, she falls to Yibum. Correct? Even though you are the equivalent of the husband, totally, but an agent, the meaning of agent means you represent someone. But if there's no one to represent, because the man is no longer alive, you can't be an agent, right? We're speaking about as a representative, what are you? Are you fully independent of the one you represent? Therefore, even though he becomes unstable, becomes a shota, you're still in a position to give the get, because the agent himself is a stable person. Or do we say no? The agent is only an extension, in the words of, is yoda richto. He's like the long arm of the husband. So what happens if the arm, but the person himself becomes incompetent? His hand could be fully functional, but if the mind doesn't work, the arm becomes irrelevant, right? So the stability of the agent is irrelevant because what is the power behind the functionality of the agent? It's the one who appointed him. Therefore, according to the Torah, if the husband becomes incompetent, he's not qualified to get, even on a Torah level, the get is not a valid get. That's the famous machlokes the Rambam in the Torah. You following? That's the argument.
What if the father says, I want...
No, but the daughter's not the agent. Here, the daughter's not an agent. I'm saying. Well, I'm just giving you an example. When the Torah says the daughter is qualified to receive the get, she's not the domain. She is like a third hand of the father. So but what's the operating mechanism? The father. So the father being the power, he could delegate it through agency. But you not being the delegating power. So you are the equivalent of the agent has limited power, although you're the agent. Therefore, you cannot appoint another agent.
So the father can appoint a shliach to accept the get from the husband. Right?
Correct.
So if he sent the shliach to accept the get, and before the guy accepts the get, the father dies.
No, because there's still a daughter. That's a separate discussion. That's a separate discussion. Okay? But no. Let's stick to this right now. That we'll get to. That has to be discussed. Everybody agrees that if a father marries off his daughter when she's 12 years old, she hasn't reached 12 and a half, and the father dies, who's in control of that marriage now? Of course the daughter. Because now it's only when she's in the domain of the father he's in control. But once he's not here, now all that's left, she's in full control. Whoever's in control delegates. If you're dealing with an agent regarding a husband and the husband dies, So a person cannot divorce someone else's wife. So even if you learn like the Rambam, that the agent is independent of the one who appointed him in terms of his function, but what is the meaning of shliach? Shliach means you represent someone. But if the man dies, you're not representing anyone any longer, right? There's nobody to represent. That's ain't get lachamisa. It's not simple. It's not simple. It's not simple. I don't want to go there. It's complicated. You know, milu mimser l'shliach, but it's a whole different thing. As long as the original one who appointed the first agent is not opposed, it's a whole question whether he can't. Because if you are the equivalent of the original person, why can't you? Well, let's say you're authorized. He authorizes you to appoint an agent.
No, let's just say, just giving him a blanket, he doesn't mention saying, you are my agent, go do this. Now that agent can appoint another agent.
It's not simple. 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 It's for other reasons. It's for other reasons. Other reasons.
Well, getting to this, the way that you, I think, began to explain this is, if the father said to the daughter, you are my agent, accept this, but you are not allowed to delegate.
The father doesn't have to, no, he doesn't say that. The father doesn't say that.
If that's what he said, but the original
One second. I understand. But we're asking the question, could the father put that limitation on the daughter? The Torah empowers the daughter to accept the get, to be the equivalent of the father, not as his domain. She is the third hand of the father. Let's say the father's opposed to her accepting the get. It's irrelevant. Because Torah says she is the equivalent of the father's hand. And if you put it in the father's hand, his daughter's divorced. If you put it in her hand, she's divorced.
Because this can happen
Without the consent.
That's why it works.
So what I'm saying, the daughter's hand is the father's hand. Not domain, hand. It's his hand.
And that is agent.
What does that mean? Does it mean agency?
No. Doesn't mean. She is the hand of the father. So that's our question. When the Torah says she's the hand of the father, says the father could appoint an agent, can she appoint the agent? Or do we say she's only the hand, similar to what I discussed at Torah? It's a third hand. But the operating mechanism is the person. She's not the operating mechanism. Therefore, she cannot appoint an agent. That's the two sides of the question. So that he answered him, she's not independent of the father, but rather she's only an extension of the father. It's as if the father would have a third hand. So to put it in her hand, you could put it in her hand. It's like putting it in the father's hand. But in terms of appointing an agent, that's only the father, because he is so-called the proprietor over the marriage.
She's not the agent. We've also said she cannot be the courtier.
It's a different concept. If the Torah wouldn't have written an extra word to tell me the courtyard is the equivalent of the hand, I'd say the Torah says you must put it in her hand. Her hand is her hand. Her courtyard is not her hand. The Torah introduces a concept, even the domain is the equivalent of her hand, is the equivalent of her hand. But the hand is the hand, correct? So therefore, her hand is the father's hand, not his domain, his hand.
So putting it in her hand, you can learn this literally from the way the Torah
Exactly.
expresses it. It must be put in her hand.
In her hand.
And because she's more than 12 years old, 12 or more.
No, she could be a minor. She could be a minor. We said also.
It could even work as a minor.
But we wouldn't have the question, could she delegate it through an agent if she'd be a minor?
It would work.
Definitely would work. It would work.
Just because the Torah says you shall put it
In her hand.
It's got nothing to do with the father at this point.
Exactly.
The Torah just says
Exactly.
she's not his hand.
Well, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot put it in her hand. It's not valid. If there's a father, you cannot put it in her hand. It's only because we rule like the Chachamim. Her hand means the father's hand or her hand. Because her hand, it's her hand. And the father, because he is the so-called the proprietor over the marriage, his hand is her. When Torah says her hand, that's his hand. Because he's the one who originally established the marriage. He agreed that his daughter should be married. And the marriage is contingent on his consent.
If we said that a minor girl can receive the get in her hand and it's effective.
I'm explaining to he was talking she's only arusa. If she's in the sewer, if she's fully married, everybody agrees. You put the get in the minor's hand, she's divorced. He was talking because she's still partial. Right, this is the first stage. This is the first stage we're speaking again.
So the second stage works.
Definitely, everybody agrees.
Because you take the Torah literally.
Yeah, you put it in her hand. Because it's not a question of being competent. It has nothing to do with your halachic intelligence. The second stage, no, first stage. First stage, where she's still in the domain of the father. That's our question. Rebuta says she definitely, her hand is not the location to put. The hand is the father's hand. The Chacham say no, there's a third hand. The father has a third hand.
So when the rabbi in the Pekudah says Mekudesh, that's the first stage.
That's the first stage.
Then they go on to say everything.
Then you have Birchas Erusin. That's the blessing. That's Birchas Erusin. Then you have Nesuin. Harei Mukadeshes Li. That's.
It's sort of not full marriage.
No, it's adultery. She's a married woman. She needs a get, definitely.
So what's missing?
She hasn't entered into his domain until it's concluded. The chuppah represents his domain. There's no question that's why you go have yichud afterwards. He takes his wife into his domain. That's the conclusion of. That's the fully leaving fully entering into his domain. Nesuin is fully entering into the husband's domain.
So you're saying it's a strange thing. She's fully married. She has all the liabilities that she should veer off the path after the first stage.
Correct.
The father still has control.
No, I mean there are other ramifications. If she's a nara, let's say regarding nullifying her vows, her nedarim, right? It's a partnership between the husband and the father. The father cannot independently annul her vows. It has to be in conjunction with the husband. Once she's 12 and a half now, the husband does it independent of the father because she's left his domain. I mean, there are things. What? 6 months. From 12 to 12 and a half. Exactly. When she's a nara. Okay.
Any other matters she can be the agent because
She's an adult.
she's an adult.
Well, here also, if the father would, if the father would appoint her to be the agent, right? It would work. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, says Nara is not qualified to receive the get. Independent, whatever the father would appoint her to be an agent to represent him to receive the get. She's no worse than the third party, right? Of course, she's qualified because she's an adult. An adult. Okay, that's a separate discussion. Whether that's shlichos or shliach, that's another discussion. Okay, so he answered him. He says no. That she's a third hand, but a little bit of difficulty over here. Rabbi Yehuda, Reish Lakish, where the machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says just as according to the Chachamim, the nar is qualified to what? To receive the get. She's qualified to marry independent of the father. Correct? That's Reish Lakish. I'm saying Reish Lakish according to the Chachamim. The daughter could marry independent of the father. Even the father's opposed, she could marry. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no. The Chacham agree that she cannot. They concur with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? Why? Because there she's extricating herself from the domain of the father. In terms of get, she's re-entering into the domain. Here, extricating she cannot. Why? Because he says, v'yotz v'hoyso. Just as the Torah says she's qualified to receive the get, so therefore the Torah equates marriage with divorce. She's qualified independent to be married, independent of the father. Right? That's Reish Lakish. Yes or no? Yes. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says, although we have a hekesh, v'yotzav hoyso, it's not in regard to that. The daughter cannot independently marry. So let's go. Let's ask our shayla here. Could the daughter appoint a shliach according to Reish Lakish, according to the Chachamim? Would it be a question, could the daughter appoint a shliach? For what? for a get, to receive the get. Would never be a shayla. Never a question. We see clearly from the halach of marriage, she's fully independent of the father. Right? If the understanding is she's in the domain, she is the third hand of the father, the equivalent. So how could she marry independent of the father? Father's opposed to the marriage. How could she create a marriage which the father's opposed to? So you see, she's independent. And so you have two people who could dictate in this domain. She could dictate marriage, regardless, even if the father's opposed to it, according to Rish Lakish.
How do we see it? I thought Rish Lakish.
The Yatzav Ha'yisa.
I thought that Rish Lakish holds that she's in a marriage is also a third hand.
No, but that we explain that. You cannot be a third hand. Otherwise, what's the whole discussion? The father's agreeable to the marriage.
Okay.
So everybody agrees. Father's agreed to the marriage. Of course she can be married. Even the Ketana, she can be married. Right? So when Rish Lakish says she can marry independent father, means even the father's opposed to it. So if she's opposed to it, is the question, could she appoint an agent? Of course she can appoint an agent. So you see, she's more than just the third hand. She functions independent of the father, even to extricate herself from his domain. So the whole discussion here is only according to Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the Chachamim. When we say that she's qualified to receive the get, in this capacity, does the Torah invest her with the power to even to delegate it through an agent? That's the discussion here. That's what I'm saying. According to Rish Lakish, it's not even a question. It's a kosh game.
Are you sure Rish Lakish would say that an Nara can appoint an agent on this basis? Would he differentiate between kiddushin and
It's a kosh game. It's a kosh game.
maybe differentiate?
Why does Rabbi Yochanan differentiate between kiddushin and gittin?
Because she's under the domain of two. There's
No,
two
according to the Chachamim. According to the Chachamim, get yes, because she's re-entering.
Right.
But kiddushin not.
Benefits. Did we say that before?
No, because so Rashi, because he's agreeable. So it's something he's agreeable to, because he's fully re-entering into his domain.
Right. And the
But
way
kiddushin, she's leaving his domain,
she's leaving,
and yet,
it's a detriment.
therefore, then she's not independent. Father Rish Lakish says no. The Yotzav Ha'yisa, as regarding get she can, regarding kiddushin she can.
Would he apply it to all cases of
But if she could extricate herself, that means she's an independent operator. She operates independent of the father.
we might say only with respect
Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. She dictates her own life, so she can't. Whoever she is, she can appoint her shliach in that capacity. It's understood.
It's full of the vow. According to Rish Lakish, with the vow, she's not an independent person during this interview.
You know, because I have exeris akosov here. What
That's a sort of an exception.
do you
It's
mean?
not-
In vows.
She takes a vow.
But even Rish Lakish agrees. Let's say she wants to fully marry herself beyond kiddushin. That she can't. No, this is the Yotzav Ha'yisa. It's kiddushin.
Kiddushin, it's just it's strange that she would allow, that he would understand that she could enter into the first stage but not the second stage.
She can't fully extricate herself from the father. Cannot fully extricate her from this, because here she's still in his domain to a degree. But fully extricating himself, that even Rish Lakish agrees. Right?
The father is opposed to her having entered into first stage. He cannot affect the divorce. That can only come from the husband.
Not affect the divorce. He cannot
He cannot force her out of it.
not force her out of it. Of course, that's understood. Everybody agrees. No, but he can't prevent the marriage from taking place initially.
No, I understand.
The kiddushin is a kiddushin regardless whether the father agrees or disagrees, because you see her as an independent person.
But
The reason why I'm allowing you to speak is I just want everybody to be aware that you're here. Go ahead.
if an adult woman gets a get,
Yeah.
is that on any level considered a kinyan if
She doesn't have to be. Yet to be written on Yisura Hanor.
no, but
Even if it's,
no, it's a woman making a kinyan at any time.
she doesn't have to make a kinyan. As long as it's in her hand, she's divorced.
But is she making a kinyan either monetarily?
No, nothing. That's what I'm showing you. Even if it's written on Yisura Hanor, it's something that you're not even permitted to benefit from. So it's not. You cannot acquire it. She's divorced. It's just putting the object of the writ of divorce in her hand that terminates the marriage. Okay, we'll stop here.